Hi, everyone. It's another wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous day today. So, I'm not complaining. Today, I want to touch on a subject that I haven't seen anyone else talking about except for one person. So, I think this is something that needs to be spoken about more because this is where a lot of people are most likely missing the mark and misunderstanding this whole thing. Everybody talks about we need to raise our vibration. There is this idea floating around. It's been around for a very long time where, people talk about raising the vibration, raising the frequency so that changes everything, right? The problem with that idea, it I would actually call it like almost some kind of dogma. It's like a dogmatic idea. Is that people don't realize, or perhaps they don't understand, that there is no need to do that. Well, you might be telling yourself, what the hell is this guy talking about? How is it that I don't have to raise my vibration? Well, here's the thing. There are parts of us that are always in a very specific state. That state is perpetual, eternal, and it's unchangeable. It never changes. It always is. Because we are not the body. We are not the mind. The real you, the real you, is the awareness behind it all, behind everything. Before anything even happens, before your thought process begins, there is the awareness. The awareness has always been and will always be, regardless of us being aware of it or not. Because the awareness itself is self-aware. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are aware of that ourselves. So there's nothing to be confused about here. This part of us, which is basically what I would call it, your personal consciousness field, that is the most powerful and divine part of every person. That is who you truly are. And like Rumi once said, just to sort of like exemplify this in a simple manner, you're not a drop in the ocean. This explains everything perfectly. You are the entire ocean in a drop. That is the magnitude and the vastness of your awareness, your consciousness, what you truly are. So the secret here is not raise your vibration like many people think and many people believe. The secret here is to learn how to embody that part of yourself. Because once you do that, you don't have to worry about any of these minor details that sometimes can act like misdirection, and dogmatic traps. Our psyche works in very particular ways. And this is the whole issue with this whole spiritual movement that exists out there these days. New age groups, and you name it, there's all kinds of different, branches and trees of the same type of ideologies and dogmatic ideas and all that stuff. But the truth is that the awareness is what you really are. So until we learn to begin to connect with this awareness aspect of ourselves, and then we begin to practice self-awareness, living in presence, being in the moment, then once you finally get to establish that connection, then everything will change. That is how it works, truthfully. Because that aspect of yourself is not bound by any of the rules and boundaries that exist here and are part of this realm. That aspect of yourself is boundless, limitless, and capable of doing anything at any given point. That aspect of yourself is eternity and infinity, and even beyond that. That aspect of yourself operates at the highest possible frequency, and perhaps even beyond that. There's a very high likely chance that that aspect of yourself is above all of that. That is how powerful that consciousness and awareness is. That is who we truly are. That is who you are. In the Vedic traditions, it is said that, the difference between a god and a normal person is that the god is the full embodiment of all of that, and the normal person isn't. That is the only thing that distinguishes one from another. So let that sink in. Think about that for a minute and understand how amazing that is. So, as many people think or believe, and listen, I'm not here to, I said this, many times before, you're free to have your own belief system, believe whatever you want, follow whatever you want, but just know and understand that this whole concept of one single entity that everybody calls God, it's a very silly thing. It's almost like a myth that's been perpetuated throughout the ages. That was created to make us think of yourselves as lesser beings, when that's actually not the case. Because God is an energy. It's a very specific frequency signature that everybody possesses, whether they know it or not. It's inside of every single living being, especially when we are in the human form. That is our true nature. That is who we truly are. And in order for us to go back to that state, we have to learn a lot of things. We have to live these mundane lives here in this realm, experience all kinds of different things. So then, after we go through a whole process and we begin to ask the serious questions that everybody asks themselves at some point in their lives, we finally begin to understand and realize some of this stuff. And then we're like, oh, so this is how it works. So we really have to practice awareness and presence. This has to be a staple of our daily lives all the time, as much as possible, because that is who you really are. That is who we really are. That is it. That is your true nature. That is your true form. And that aspect of ourselves is beyond anything, is above anything, and can do anything. So it's one thing for us to practice these things and then to be able to fully embody that energetic signature and frequency that exists within us and is a part of us. That is a whole nother level when it comes down to the spiritual aspect of stuff. And that is the hardest thing that anyone can possibly do. And that is why there have been so few teachers throughout the history of mankind that have achieved those levels of illumination and what a lot of people like to call enlightenment. What enlightenment really is when a being truly learns and gets to finally embody the true version of themselves and then gets to keep that state permanently without ever falling from it, falling from grace. That is how it is. So that's not an easy thing to do. For a lot of us, it'll probably take multiple lifetimes for us to be able to reach that point. But it's not impossible, it's not beyond reach, and it's doable because it has been done before throughout the ages, and it's probably being done right now as I speak. And everyone can do that. The limitations that we impose upon ourselves are part of a belief system that we created because of our upbringing. That is all that it is. We convince ourselves of these things, that we have limitations, we can't do certain things. The list it goes on forever. But the reality is that once we connect with this aspect of ourselves and we begin to practice and begin to embody this, that is when the real game-changing things begin to happen and turn to be real. And this is one of the reasons why so many people, they people that are what you would consider spiritual people, right? People that practice a lot of different things, meditation. They have their daily affirmations. Every day they tell themselves all these things about themselves and all that. You can do that stuff all you want your whole life, but if you are not actively pursuing and practicing awareness and presence, none of those things are going to come to fruition the way people say they do. because that is the most important part of the whole process. Without that, none of that stuff happens. Without that, none of those manifestations that you're been praying and hoping for will come to fruition, because that is the biggest part of the whole thing. That has to happen. That has to be done. That has to be put into work and practice. Without that, none of that stuff will flourish. So just keep that in mind. So in a way, this whole concept and idea that we need to raise our vibration, my advice to you is stop focusing on that. Stop trying so hard to raise your vibration, because that is a misunderstanding and a misconception. And like I said, you are free to follow whatever ideas you find fit for yourself and operate however you please. But trust me when I tell you this, without awareness, we'll just be lost in some way, shape, or form. Without awareness, we're still sleeping. You know, like when people sleepwalk when they're sleeping, they get up and walk around. That's exactly what being unaware means. That's how it works here in this realm. So awareness is all that matters. Before we even think or attempt to do anything else, awareness, presence, stillness, that's the stuff of wonders. That's the stuff that makes all happen. That is all you need. So that's where everyone should actually start at. Because without that, my friends, we make everything so much harder for ourselves. It's not even funny. Now again, you're free to believe and follow whatever it is that you want to do when it comes down to these aspects of yourself, right? Your life is yours to live. But try to do this for a little while and see how it changes everything, because it does. It doesn't work any other way. I am on my 4th day of fasting today. Yesterday I had a bit of a light headache pretty much for most of the day. But after I went to bed last night and got up today, I'm feeling fine. That hasn't come back, and hopefully it doesn't. It's just a side effect of having almost, if not zero, electrolytes in your system at this point, because the body begins to, work its autophagy, and then it just burns fat for energy. And I don't have a lot of fat to burn, I have some, but not a lot. So, I don't know. I was planning on doing this fast until Monday, but now I'm gonna see how it goes for today and tomorrow, and maybe I'll resume things on Saturday, perhaps. Because when you don't have any fat left to burn, then you just your body just begins to cannibalize muscles and things like that to create that energy. You don't want to get to that point. So anyway, yeah, that's that for my fasting. And remember, awareness is everything. That is the magic. That is the secret. That is the trick. That'll change it all. So, with that said, if you like this channel, you like the message, you like what I do, don't forget to leave a like, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. It helps the channel grow, reach more people, and that's the only reason why I make these videos. will catch you all next time. Be safe, take care. Until next one.